Before we actually get on to Johansson, just to emphasize the somewhat unstructured nature of these classes, sometimes as unstructured as human life itself. I just wanted to give you all a glimpse of one of the reasons why we are studying, why we are looking at the etymology and the analysis of the words. And these are thoughts that have developed in my mind since I gave that talk at the summer school a couple of weeks ago. Just apart from the pure fun of it, can actually be quite useful even in one's practice to understand really what is being talked about, because a straight translation will so often just not get it. If it's a translation of a very, very simple thing like the kasako ketam kasati, the farmer plows the field. Okay, you can get a pretty accurate translation, and the English or any other modern language translation will, in many cases, very effectively get it. The more practical and mechanical it is, the more a translation will accurately reflect it. I mean, if you just think about this, it's far easier to translate into any language of the world the manual for how to operate your toaster than, for example, the sonnets of Shakespeare. One of them, you can get a totally accurate translation, leaving no room for ambiguity at all. And the other, that no translation will be more than a partial snapshot of what something looks at from a certain angle. And one particular thing, which, just going off track for a bit, but okay, I'm just going off track. Why should I apologize? Let's look at the word in the Noble Eightfold Path, the Atangiko Maggo. The one that's translated as right effort. And this is just going to give you an example, and hopefully it's an encouragement as to why you are learning Pali. What's the real benefit of it? My mission over the next 5 minutes is, by analyzing what it is in Pali, and also with reference to Sanskrit, why it's actually really valuable to analyze these words, see what the imagery is, see what their inner life is. Now, for this, I'm going to call back. Okay, do you all have my iPad? Can you see? Okay, it's working now, thank you. Okay, we're off track, but maybe onto an even more interesting track. Right, the word translated as right effort is samma vayama. Okay, so in English, we might read right effort. And unless we understand, really understand these words in Pali, we will simply understand them as speakers of English in the 21st century. And we will understand effort, we'll understand right, and we will put our English speakers' spin on those words, and we will interpret them. We will tend to interpret them in an ordinary way. Let me now hopefully show you why there's so much more to it, and how these have got actually a vibrant imagery. That, so yes, right effort is partly it. You can't say it's wrong, but it's partial. It only shows you a little bit of it. And if you unpack those words and how they are formed and what they really mean, you see so much more. I'm going to write them in Sanskrit as well. If you look at this word samyak, samyak actually is the Sanskrit equivalent of samma. A little bit of standard Pali Sanskrit phonetics now, where you have a cluster of consonants in Sanskrit, they tend to become the nearest form of doubled consonant in Pali. That is why mya becomes a double M in Pali. And if you get a short vowel followed by a stop, that's a k or a p or a t. In Sanskrit, it tends to the k drops off and it just becomes a long r. That's why samyak in Sanskrit becomes samma in Pali. Now let's look at samyak. Now samyak is a very, very commonly used word. As you know, it's mostly translated as right. You know, samaditi, right view, samajiva, right livelihood, sammakamanta, right action, all these right things. There is a lot more to this word, samma, and it's composed of 3 elements. The prefix sam and 2 verbal roots combined, sam, I, and anch. The root, sorry, not the root, the prefix sam is cognate with the Greek syn, S-Y-N, meaning putting together, coming, synthesis, things like that. And it's cognate with the Latin con and co. So the idea is bringing together. It also contains the idea of a completion of something, as in sara, going, and samsara is like a series of completed goings, a series of completed circles, samsara. So we've got this, the idea of coming together, the sam-i, going, and anch. The root anch means to bend or to fold. Why has it become sami anch? Why has it become an ak at the end? Well, firstly, because no Sanskrit word is allowed to end in 2 consonants, so the n drops and the final ch becomes a k. So it's just by phonetic mutation. It's the same word, samyanch becomes samyak. Again, a bit of a complex rule. For the moment, just take it from me. The ak means the folding, the bending. And this anch, meaning bending or folding, we now have the ch and the k come together, mutate, sometimes use one form, sometimes the other. We have remnants of it in English. We have the verb to speak and the noun speech. We have break and breach. We have this mutation between k and ch. The mutation is much more common, for example, in the Slavonic languages, the k and ch and the g and zh mutation. Whenever I'm saying something about the Slavonic languages, I'm just very careful to see whether Iris is nodding. Thank you, Iris, got that right. So this anch, the ank, bending, no coincidence that the very bendy joint at the bottom of the leg is called an ankle. It's from that same root. It is the bendy joint, the angle. Also the word angle comes from it. So the angle, ankle, anch, the idea of bending. Bending together. E means to go, as we've just been looking at, the root E, some E anch. It means going together, coming together, folding together. So this word samyak, samma in Pali, like so many of these words that actually have quite a profound meaning, are formed of very, very simple elements. Some of these elements, just such basic human experiences. So many of the words that we look at, and vayama is another one. We'll come to that in a moment. So the samma, samyak, is not just right. It's the idea of it's coming together, samyanch. It's harmoniously melding together. there's the idea of a holistic harmony, a going with the flow. So you see, more than just right. It's like going according to the moral law, acting in harmony with life. Okay, so now you see how the translation right is, kind of on the right track. But if you see the imagery and the power behind this word, that was how the word would have been perceived by the original speakers. Samyanch. So it's harmonious, it's in line with the Dharma, it's in line with the law of the universe, as it were. And taking Chinese imagery, according to the Tao. So Vayama. We might not even get as far as Johansson today, but honestly, it doesn't matter. I mean, the most important thing I think here is you're just being exposed to the language, and hopefully with some value. The root yam. The basic meaning of that root is the exertion of force, not a hitting, not a sharp hitting force, just the exertion of pressure or force. The word can sometimes be used to lift something, but to hold it, as in holding a weight, or to restrain or hold back. And it makes it a verbal noun in yama. A lot of words in Sanskrit and Pali, and in all of the modern European languages, more so in the Germanic and Slavonic than in Latin, but in the Latin to a large extent as well, they create a whole host of subtle meanings by taking a basic root and then putting a prefix in front of it. Like, for instance, the Latin root cur, meaning to run, and with cursus, we have incursion, excursion, to recur, to occur. All of these are putting simple prefixes before a very basic root that just means to run, and we get quite subtle meanings out of them. So when you go on excursion, in Latin, it just means running out of school for the day, an excursion. If you incur costs, you are running into them. The prefix ob means in front, or like blocking, you like obstruct, something standing in front of you. To occur, obcurrere in Latin, something runs in front of you, suddenly runs out on the road, and it occurs. To recur, to run again. Exactly the same thing happens with great richness in Sanskrit and Pali, and you often get 2 and even 3 of these prepositions occurring together. So yama. Now, the verbal prefix a most frequently has the meaning of towards. In fact, it's cognate with our English at and with the Latin ad, meaning to. Venire, we have the advenire, the advent, the coming towards you. So so if the yama is exerting force or pressure, the ayama is like holding back in, the towards you, restraining towards you. Ayama. Okay, none of you who was at the talk I gave a couple of weeks ago answers, but anyone knows how all of us already know this word? Any volunteers? Why do we already know the word? Okay. Those of you who know anything about yoga have heard about pranayama. That is prana, the breath, the ayama, the controlling, the holding, the restraining. Then by a slight extension, just controlling it, making it do what you wanted. That's the ayama. Prana, ayama, pranayama. Oops. ayama. Now, the prefix vi has mostly a separative force, like apart, separating. Gacchati, it goes. Vigacchati, it goes away. It can also have a very positive meaning in the sense of as in separating, pulling apart a veil, something that stops you from seeing. We all know that from, in fact, even in our lesson 1 in Lily de Silva, one of the verbs in the list of verbs on lesson 1, page 1 is passati, meaning sees, passati. It makes the verbal noun as passana, seeing. Now put a vi in front of it, and what have we got? We've got vipassana, which is like seeing into, seeing past the initial appearances, as it were, the imagery of pulling apart a curtain, pulling apart a veil that enables you to have to see into, often translated, quite well translated, as insight, that is the vipassana. So in viyama, just look at viyama on its own, viyama, without the R for the moment, and that has the idea of like pulling away, viyama. It's also, it's used as a unit of measure, is the outstretched hands used as a measure of length. And then, so viyama in Sanskrit becomes just bhyama in Pali. One of the most famous sayings of the Buddha, here in this fathom-long body, deliverance is to be won. Imasmin yeva bhyama mate kalevare. That's the bhyama mate, measured by a bhyama, the stretching out of the hands. Here in this, often translates fathom long, but just means that the length of the outstretched arm, the viyama. Now put these together. Put these together. The viyama. We have now, and viyama by santi, the e followed by an r becomes a yet, so viyama. Yeah, hang on a minute, viyama. And that's in Sanskrit. Become by phonetic mutation, the VR just becomes a va. By the way, this is another reason why we look at Sanskrit when we're analyzing the vocabulary of Pali, because if you look at the Sanskrit, it makes it all much more transparent. If you just had va, it wouldn't mean that much. But vr, the v, the pulling away, the the pulling towards you. Put them together, and with this root ya, which of itself has a meaning of the exertion of force, we have now a kind of dynamic tension. Viyama, ayama, put them together, viyama. It's like a tug of war. The viyama, pulling away, stretching away, ayama, stretching towards you, viyama, you've got the tugging, the pulling, the opposing forces. So this effort, the Pali word, Sanskrit word both, are, so to speak, inviting us to see what we are supposed to do as a kind of struggle, a tussle, a dynamic tussle between the lower forces of our nature that are pulling us in one way and the teachings of the Blessed One that are pulling us in another way. And this is a struggle that's going on within us. It's a tug of war, viyama. So, but we are invited to engage in this dynamic struggle. How? Not as a fight, but samma, harmoniously engaging in this dynamic tension between opposing forces. So now we see translators write effort. Yeah, okay, kind of. But explore the vocabulary, and you now see a real dynamism. You see the inner life of these words. And there's another little point, actually, that only struck me a couple of days ago. Even our word effort, it's from the Latin exfortiare, force, fortis, strong. So effort, the X out, fortiare, to put out force. It means the word itself implies a one-way movement of force. Exfortiare, effort. It's the strength going out of you. You've got your whatever it is you're making an effort towards. Our English word with the, from its Latin root, it's a one-way direction of force. So the word we're using in English from Latin fails to get this dynamic imagery of the two-way struggle that the Sanskrit word has, and from it the Pali word. So hopefully by seeing this analysis of it, the meaning of what is meant by right effort hopefully now takes on a little bit more life. You see the inner life of this word. So I will leave right effort for the moment. And again, please, any queries, just ask either by raising your hand or emails. And so many times over the past couple of years, since we went onto Zoom, 2.5 years now, there have been some really, really good questions arising in writing. And sometimes, a good part of the following lesson has been taken up by these questions. So please do send them. What am I trying? Oh yeah, here we are. Let's go back to Johansson. So hopefully you can see my Word document. Can you? Thank you. For those of you who are unfamiliar, what I tend to do is on the top is the actual text that we're looking at. In the next one is just the boxes where I analyze the vocabulary. If it's indented, that means a preliminary explanation. So before we get down to Nirodha, sorry, I just explained Rud, Nirud, and the indentation means a preliminary explanation before we get to the main word. As for example, the srij, nisrij, and so on before we get to patinissago. And further bits down at the bottom, which again will help you to see the inner meaning of the word. And for example, lots of you say, how would you say the abode of snow in Sanskrit? Okay, those of you who were with me last year will know how to say the abode of snow. It's something you know, but may not have known that you know until somebody tells you, because hima is the word for snow, alaya is the word for abode. So the Himalaya becomes by Santi Himalaya, which of course we say the Himalayas in modern English, but it's the Himalaya, the snow abode, the abode of snow. So I will just read it. And if there are any volunteers to read it after me, I will welcome volunteers. So I'm going for reading 4 now. Katamancha bhikkave dukkha nirodham arya satcham yo tasayeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho chago patinissago mutti analayo. Back to a little bit of terribly simple grammar. In the previous hour, we were looking at masculine nouns ending in stem a, which make their nominatives in o, Well, here we have got 3 of them, 4 of them. So nirodho, stem nirodha, it's here in the nominative form, nirodho. Same with chago, patinisago, and alayo. They're all nominative singular masculines from the nouns in stem a. You will very often find feminines ending, feminine nouns ending in a T, an E or a T. Mutti, liberation, moksha, mukti, mukti in Sanskrit, mutti in Pali. You will also see a neuter here. Hang on, there's my cursor. This neuter. If it's a neuter, this nouns ending in stem short a. Talk about Buddha, Satcha. Buddha and Satcha are truth. But Buddha is a masculine noun, and so it's nominative ends in o, Buddho. Satcha is a neuter noun, and so its nominative form ends in an That's why we say Arya Satcham. Cognate with the endings in Latin and on in Greek. Katamancha. Let's just analyze this. You can boom, boom, boom. Katamam. Katama means what? What is it? It's like what in the kind of the what that asks for an explanation of what it is. An ordinary word what is just kim, but katama means what in the sense of tell me about it, what type, explain it. So katamancha bhikkave dukkha nirodham arya satcham. The arya satcham, let me put a hyphen here. By the way, Sanskrit never used hyphens. We can put in hyphens there to separate a compound word into 2. Arya Satcham, often translated as a noble truth. So what, bhikkave, O monks, is the dukkha nirodham Arya Satcham? Dukkha, nirodha, cessation, Arya Satcham. What is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering? Sorry, I'm just writing. Whenever you see me writing on my iPad, but you can't see it's because I've forgotten to change screen, please do shout. Satcha, meaning a truth. Why does satcha mean truth? And as with so many words, almost all of the words that we'll be looking at, and all of the words that have any real dharmic or spiritual significance, they are almost never kind of a random collection of noises that you've got to learn. If you look into it, lift the lid, you'll say, aha, that's what it really means. So, as so often happens, if we look in Sanskrit, the word is satya. Exactly the same meaning. Satya, Sanskrit, satya, Pali. You will find, for example, that whenever you get a tia together, it tends to become a ch in Pali. The difference is that in Pali, it's actually written like that because it represents the sounds. In English, we still write as a t. For example, if you look at the word, nature. Very few people say nature. In fact, you sound a bit odd. I think a couple 100 years, maybe 200 years ago, they would pronounce it really carefully as nature. But in English now, it's become the tia, it's become a ch. It's a normal, it's a kind of a comprehensible, normal phonetic progression. Tia, cha, a bit easier. And it's so in English, we do it unofficially, but we still write it as a TU. In Pali, it's done officially. In fact, I think we've got in this, yeah, we have. We've got here, we've got the word in the Sanskrit word tyaga, meaning renunciation, which actually in Pali is chaga. So anyway, satya is from the root sat. And the root sat is from the root meaning to be. Just very simple, to be. So the satya is that which really is. So that's why the word means a truth, a description of things as they really are. The satya, as in the essence, esse, to be. Essentia, the essential, how things really are, the essence of it. The satya is that same idea, satya, satya. So what is this dukkha nirodham ariya satyam? Katamancha bhikkave dukkha nirodham ariya satyam. It's a bit pleonastic. It just means that which is. Your analayo, the analia, which. I won't go into the construction of the relative clauses here. Leave that for next time, next week, when you're all much more advanced. So to say of that, to say tanhaya. Okay, tanhaya. Again, I'm not going to burden you with too much grammar, but just look at this tanha. This is the feminine noun ending in a long a, and the genitive is tanhaya. Now, tanha is, sorry, call up my iPad again. Tanha in Sanskrit, it is Krishna. By the way, when we put a dot under a consonant, most of you know this very well already, it means that it's a retroflex. It's the difference between a t, a dental t, and a retroflex ta, ta, ta. And the same applies to it, n, n, d, d. When the R appears, when the dot appears under an R, it's the it's what's called the syllabic R. It's a r, which doesn't have a vowel. It is its own syllable, its own whole syllable. We have it, for example, we have the same kind of thing in English. So look at the word. We don't say bottle, it's bottle, a bottle. The all is the syllable on its own, bottle. Sanskrit does the same with the r, Krishna. And you find it. I think you find it in Croatian, don't you, Iris? Isn't the word for a heart srce? Is that? Have I got that right? Srce. It's the same idea. The r on its own, just written on its own, is an entire syllable. Yeah, thank you, Iris. So here we have exactly the same thing, trishna, which means thirst. And if you look at the we've got to put a th in English, and for the r, we've changed to an ir. The s remains the same. So our English word thirst is a direct descendant, a very direct descendant of the Sanskrit trishna. In fact, oddly enough, the English form of it, from trishna to thirst, is actually closer than the Pali form. The Pali is actually mutated away from it more than the English has. So in this one particular case, there are several cases, our actual English has changed from the Vedic less than the Pali has. So there we are, it's that same word. So it is of this tasayeva, I won't bother with the grammar, of that very thirst, tasayeva tanha, asesa viraga, nirodho, chago, patinissago, mutti, analayo. Now, I've done an analysis of the word, yes, here we are, yes, the analysis of the word alayo and analayo. Again, the Sanskrit root of the Vedic root li is exactly the same as our English word lie, in the sense of to lie down, not to lie down. It's that same root. So your alaya is the place you go to lie down. It's your safe retreat, the place you want to go to. If you are analaya, nominative form analayo, it means you do not have an abode. It often by extension means an attachment to something, because we're drawn back to where we feel safe, drawn back to our home, drawn back to the place we can safely lie down. That's your alaya. If you are analaya, you have really gone into the homeless life. You have given up these attachments. No place to lie down, no place that you call your own to go and lie down. It's the analaya. So the ending of suffering, hang on, I lost my cursor, common cursor. Here we are, found him. So it's the asesi viraga nirodho. It is the cessation, the rud nirodha, the ceasing. Asesa, remainderless. The word sesa, Sanskrit shesha, simply means that which is left over. And the asesa, the that negates what follows, which we have the same in English from Greek. You're apolitical, amoral, and so on. That's the that negates what follows. So asesa, remainderless, with nothing left over. Viraga. Now look at viraga. We've done vi, getting rid of it, separation from it, and raga, sorry, iPad. The original meaning of raga is like a passion. And we still use the word in English with only a very, very slight change, because we talk about a rage. So the English word rage, in Sanskrit and Pali, raga, are from the same root. It changed to a B in Latin. That's where you talk about a rabid dog, a dog that's in a rage. And in modern Italian, you double the B, it becomes a rabbia, meaning rage or passion. So raga is, as it were, getting passionate, but being, the original meaning actually was a color. So your mind gets colored by something. If you're in a rage or a passion, either of hatred or desire or aversion, whether desirable or undesirable, it's because it infuses your whole mind with that color. Everything you do is like steeped in that color. That was the original meaning of it. And then it became, by extension, came to mean a rage or a passion. Now, we've just looked at the prefix vi, meaning separation. If you're viraga, hey, you've got rid of this raga, got rid of this passion and your rage. It's often translated, not badly, as dispassion. The Latin prefix dis, very often reflects, not etymologically, but in meaning, reflects this prefix viraga. So there's the asesa viraga, the remainderless getting rid of the passion. The nirodha, the root from the root rud, I've explained it down below. It's the basic meaning of rud is to block something or stop it. And with the prefix ni, to hold something back or stop it down, stamp it out, nirodha. And the tyaga, the renunciation. The Sanskrit root, oops, get back to my iPad again. It's the Sanskrit root is tyaj, which is just an ordinary word meaning to leave something aside, to abandon it. And with many of these kind of ordinary words of the language, when they were used by the Buddha, they took on this kind of special meaning within that context. And not just the Buddha, but the same in Hinduism and Sanskrit as well. So tyaj, it took on the special meaning of renunciation, abandonment. And it became tyaga. It very, very often happens that when you get a root that has a short a with a single vowel, when you make a verbal noun out of it, you lengthen the a, like bhava. And it happens with tyaj, tyaga. And I'll mention this now because you're going to see it again and again when you get a root that has a j in it and ends in a j. You very often find that the verbal noun changes to a g. Very often. And sometimes a short u changes to an u, low battery. Wow. Oops. Yeah, fortunately, I got my charger here. There we are. Good. This is a rule that many of you know without knowing that you know it. This root yuj means to join. In Latin, it is jungere. In English, we have junction, and indeed we have the word join via the French joindre. So yuj and join, it looks as if it's separated a bit, but there we are, it is the same word originally. So yuj, jungere, junction, join. We're now going to make a verbal noun out of it. Okay, some of you are nodding sagely. You know what's coming, don't you? First of all, by vowel mutation, the u becomes an o very commonly in the verbal noun. And of course, the j becomes a g in the verbal noun. So lo and behold, we get yoga. So yoga is simply the verbal noun from the root yuj, meaning to join. So the yoga is the uniting of yourself with, when Hindu terms, with the Paramatman. So the yoga how did I get onto that? Oh yes, I know how I got on, because I was explaining it tyaj, tyaga, yuj, yoga, and so on. So back then to our text. Actually, it's quite fortunate that in this one, there's a lot of interesting vocabulary, but the grammar is all terribly, terribly simple here. Do you all agree that the grammar is very simple, or is it just me? Viraga nirodho, the stopping, the chago, the renunciation. For a moment, I'll leave the patinisajjati, that's just a bit too exciting, and I'll go on too long if I get into that. So we'll take a simple one, mukti. The root much means just to release or to let go. It is one of those roots that makes its verbal noun by adding a ti at the end. For example, bud, root bud plus this verbal noun ending buddhi. And we all know now what happens when you get a root ending a d and a suffix beginning with a t. It becomes the buddha becomes buddha, buddhi becomes buddhi. Eileen, is the reason you put up your hand because I'd forgotten to show my, thank you, sorry. How much did you miss? Did you miss all the yuj bit? Okay, you didn't miss too much then. So we are. So buddhi, buddhi. So much, it wants to be muchti, but by a phonetic rule of Sanskrit, a ch followed by a t, it morphs into a k. Just as samyanch became samyank, therefore, and then samyak. So muchti becomes mukti. The mukti. So the original meaning of mukti from much, this very simple root much, meaning just to let go or release, then by extension, it became the liberation in the Hindu and Buddhist sense. And the mukti, mukti, is just the verbal noun. And by standard phonetic mutation, mukti becomes in Pali mutti. We see that in modern languages as well. For example, from Latin to Italian, we have the Latin word for 8 is octo, as an octagon, octagonal 8, which becomes in Italian, the k and the t merge into a double t. Italian becomes otto. And exactly the same phenomenon occurs in Pali. A kta becomes a double t, mutti. So liberation. That is why, again, you see, it's another example of why it's so valuable to look back at the Sanskrit roots, because if you just look at mutti in Pali, the original k that's there in the Sanskrit that gives a clue to what the root was has gone. So the okay, I'm going to plunge into the nissago. You're often going to, well, at least one of you, thank you, Clara Lynn, for looking so pleased that I'm going to plunge into the nissago. It encourages me to go on. Thank you, Clara Lynn. This is a word, again, look at all this complicated stuff, nisrij, nisrijati, nisajati, pati nisajati. It might look like a very discouraging morass of stuff. But if you unpick it bit by bit, it all falls into place. The only thing you've actually got to learn is this root. Okay, you've got to learn it all, but the only thing that you've got to, as it were, take for granted is this root thrij. And that means like letting something, a bit the same as much. They've got an overlapping meaning. Much and thrij both mean they're to let go. But the thrij is more to release something out of yourself. Much just means like, as in to release something out of your hand. If you are releasing a bird, much is the root that you would use. If you are releasing something out of yourself, srij is what is the verb you tend to use. It makes its verbal noun. Here we are. So srij, the root srij, actually going right back to the very origin. You can't get any further back than I'm going now. It is the very creation of the universe as we know it, according to Hindu cosmogony. The srij, again, it forms its feminine form, feminine verbal noun with a T at the end. So it would be the releasing, the letting go. Srijti, in fact, by santi, by alternation of sounds when they come together, we get srishti. Again, don't worry too much about why does srijti become srishti. There are rules for this in Sanskrit that we'll get to in due course. So the srishti, it means the creation, the initial creation of the universe is often described in the Sanskrit literature as srishti. And what does it really mean? It's just the releasing, the letting go. It's as if Brahma, as it releases the energy to form the universe, the visible, slightly more complex than that, but that's the underlying idea behind it. And Krishna says to Arjuna, that in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, whenever there is a decline of dharma in the world, srijamyahim, I srijami, I release myself forth from the hidden place, release forth into the visible world. It also, apart from srishti, you can also get an alternative verbal noun in sarga. Srij sarga. When, for example, you release a puff of breath, you can put this prefix vi in front of it, meaning separation out of you. Adds a bit of force to it. So those of you who have done some Sanskrit will have heard visarga, which is actually the release of breath, which we translated as the subdotted H. So, for example, in nominative form, in Pali we say buddho. Nominative form in Sanskrit would be originally buddhas, but then that became buddha. And this buddha, the ha at the end is the visarga, the release, the expulsion, the sending out, the emission of the breath, the visarga. I think it does actually help you to remember these things when you gather all these little bits of things that you know from here and there, gather them together as it were, they all come out of the one root and they are all explicable when you go back to look at them as it were children, offshoots of that root. There we are. The prefix in Sanskrit is ni or nir. So in Sanskrit, nisrijati becomes in Pali nisajati. Don't worry too much at this stage about why it becomes. There are rules to explain it. It's not random. So nisajati means just to let something go. When you renounce or abandon something, a vice, a treasured sin, you let it go. Is the visarga, expulsion of the breath. Nisarga, in Pali, nisagga, is the letting go, the sending away of this vice. Now the Pati Nissago in Sanskrit, Prati in Pali. Sorry, iPad screen, here we are. Prati. If there is one, ideally you want to master all of the prefixes, but if there is one really rich prefix, it is this prati or pati. It is a verbal prefix that has the idea of reciprocity. A force and counterforce. Sometimes it's used to mean against, not in a hostile sense, but one against the other. In accounting, you have your entry and your counter entry. If you had a counter entry, if they had these terms back in the Buddhist time, it would be the entry and a pati entry, a counter entry. Against as in leaning against a wall. Against in the sense that your force is against the wall, the strength of the wall holds you up. So there's a reciprocal balancing of force. The strength of the wall, your force against it. If something arises in dependence or conditioned by something else. Again, look at this root. Okay, this isn't too much to burden your memory. Look at this root, I. Very, very common. It's our root we've just been talking about, the Latin ire, and the it of exit, and so on, meaning to go. So prati I, to go against, but just means to be operating in reciprocal balance with something. So it makes, by the way, its absolutive form having gone in itya, and prati itya becomes pratitya, and in Pali, praticca. So the praticca samupada, the samupada, the co-arising, but praticca, co-arising, how? Praticca, independence, by force and counterforce, action and reaction with something else. Often translated as dependent. Again, yes, well, kind of. It'll do as a one-word translation. But if you look into praticca, you'll see prati itya. You know, the force and the counterforce. One thing happens and another happens because of it, the action and the reaction. One depending on the other. Now, we get a little bit deep now with this pati nissago. We've seen that the nissago, the saggo, the letting go, nissago, pushing it out of yourself. What does this pati on the front mean? It's this idea of mutuality. It means you have let it go, but it's almost as if these things that you're letting go, like the raga, the tanha, the thirst, you are letting it go, but it's the imagery here as if this thirst, this desire, had a life of its own, as if it had a volition of its own and it was clinging to you. You were clinging to it, but you let it go, nissago, but equally it had a life of its own. As a pati nissago, it too has relinquished you. So the pati nissago, again, like this vyayama I was explaining, not just the effort, it was a two-way thing, vyayama, the tussle back and forth. The pati nissago is more than the letting go. It has let you go as well, as if it's not constantly lying in wait to come back and get you in an unguarded moment. The pati nissago is like a mutual goodbye to the tanha. You've let it go, it's let you go. You see, and that, my dear students, is one of the reasons we are studying Pali, because you don't get this from a translation. You only get it by going right into the word itself. So the translations, yes, jolly good, and they've helped millions. But this will take it a level further, just in the understanding of what was actually being said. So I will have to exercise a little bit of discipline and say goodbye for now. I hope I will have not frightened too many of you off for the next time round. So with thanks to you all for listening. And again, please do send any queries that you have. I will positively welcome them and even deal with them at the next class. So thank you to you all, and hopefully see you next week. Good. Thank you. Thank you.